You know, Jesus intrigues me sometimes. His stories were so much simpler when I was in kindy Sabbath school. But now as I read them as an adult, sometimes I'm perplexed by his interactions. And I wonder why he does what he does. If you want to open your Bibles with me to Luke chapter 18, starting at verse 35, there's one of those stories that seems on a first reading to just be simple. But as I dig deeper into the story, I wonder about the wisdom of Jesus' way of interaction. It's Luke chapter 18, starting at verse 35. As he drew near to Jericho, a blind man was sitting by the roadside begging. And hearing a crowd going by, he inquired what this meant. They told him, "Jesus of Nazareth is passing by." And he cried out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Sorry, I have to work out how to turn the page. And those who were in front rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he cried out all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And Jesus stopped and commanded him to be brought to him. And when he came near, he asked him, "What do you want me to do for you?" He said, "Lord, let me recover my sight." Jesus said to him, "Receive your sight, your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus, praising God. When all the people saw it, they all praised God. Well, it seems like a simple story, doesn't it? There's a blind man, he calls out to Jesus, everybody says, "Be quiet." Jesus says, "No, bring the man to me." They have a conversation, the man goes away healed. Fairly simple story, except I'm a little bit intrigued by Jesus' conversation. See, I'm not quite sure about the wisdom of the God of the entire universe, knowing all things, saying to a blind man, "What do you want me to do for you?" Is Jesus silly? Come on, Jesus, this is slightly obvious. There's a blind man before him. He can't work. He doesn't have many children's storybooks to read. He's stuck in a very vulnerable and difficult situation. Yet Jesus seems to say to him, what do you want me to do for you? Why is Jesus taking this approach? It seems to me that Jesus is using a conversational style that many leaders use. He isn't just making sure the man goes away healed. He's in fact ensuring the success of the interaction. His approach engages the person to understand their world, to show that he's interested and connected and reaching out to a real live person. He's walking in places of understanding and in places of connection. See, the problem is when we have conversations where we assume something about what the other person might want and need just by looking at them, then sometimes the unspoken obligations don't actually get met. Assumptions are a particularly dangerous thing that can lead us to making mistakes in our interactions and our support of other people. I have a friend who worked for ADRA for many years, and it was about 5 years ago the tsunami happened in Samoa. My friend went over and sat around the table as the representative from ADRA. And ADRA did what they were asked to do, World Vision, all of the big names sat around the table. Well, apparently all of those experts in disaster relief sat around the table and decided that what they would do is provide emergency food to the people of Samoa. And they made up a package, and they had a discussion, and they decided that tins of tuna would be in the package. And yes, don't worry, everybody in Samoa has a machete, so we'll put tins of tuna in the package. And off the packages went. Well, of course, they made the assumption that everybody in Samoa has a machete. Except they'd forgotten one kind of detail. There'd been a tsunami. And everybody's machetes, who actually needed the food, had actually been washed out to sea. And so 2 days later, the aid workers wandered around Samoa with can openers, offering them to the people of Samoa to be able to eat their cans of tuna. It's kind of a funny example in some ways, but it does speak to how we as human beings can make assumptions. We can assume that we know what people need. We can assume what is going on in the other person's mind. But assumptions can lead to fairly unresourceful ways of handling situations. And you see that Jesus not only wanted this man to go away physically well, but he wanted to do it in a way that was engaging and that was affirming and didn't leave the man confused in any way. What at first to me seems like silliness, thinking about it more deeply, we realise that it's actually genius. When you look at the way Jesus chooses to interact, you see a set of values that says that this man is not just his brokenness, but that all of him matters. His heart matters, his voice matters, and his opinion matters. And the God of the universe, who even knows those things, is willing to ask for a conversation and be willing to connect and to listen. I saw this method used by a specialist. Many of you are aware that when I was in New Zealand, I got sick. And I had 3 bouts of cellulitis requiring IV antibiotics. For those of you who are not familiar, please don't Google it. The pictures are a bit gross, but it's a nasty infection that affects the neck cell and it kind of grows and there's this yucky red stuff. And in developing countries, people end up very sick and sometimes die from cellulitis. Well, I'd had it 3 times and had 3 doctors tell me that it was stress, and I'd been to my GP and he said, oh, maybe it's a spider bite. And I said, oh, it looks to me like the allergies I had when I was a little girl. Oh, no, I think you're fine. So finally I've got these kind of welts all over me, I've got cellulitis, and the doctor says, now Kylie, you've got chicken pox. I said, it looks to me like the allergies I had when I was a little girl. No, you've got chicken pox, go home and be in isolation. So I ended up, Christmas time, I was living in New Zealand where I had no family, and my family was actually visiting my brother in China, so I couldn't even interact with my own parents. And I had these welts all over me and I wasn't getting better, and I went into emergency and I'm going, this is allergy, and if you get rid of the allergy, you'll get rid of the cellulitis. And the doctor literally is going, it's all right. She's air patting me, it's okay. Her amazing words, I believe you. She wrote me out a referral to an immunologist. Now, I'd been to every specialist under the sun for these funny welts in my entire life, but nobody had ever sent me to an immunologist. So when it was over Christmas, I went back to the GP, and the GP said, no, Kylie, I think what you need to do is just eat more red things and orange things. And I said, now listen, those things make me feel funny and I'm not eating them anymore. So I finally get to the immunologist, and as you can see, I'm quite worked up. I've had a bunch of doctors telling me all sorts of craziness, and I'm ready for action. And I sit down next to this man, and he says to me the words that were magic. He says, tell me your story. I said, where did you want me to start? He said, at the beginning. I said, I was born in 1976. And literally he sat there for no less than 45 minutes while I told him about every welt I had ever had in my entire life. And at the end of it, I said, I've been Googling, which you should never do, and I feel sorry for doctors these days with the advance of Google. I said, I've been Googling, and I think I have a salicylate intolerance. For those of you who are not familiar with these, this is a naturally occurring chemical in fruit and vegetables. So when the GP was telling me to eat red things and orange things, it was actually telling me to eat high salicylate food, and I was not going there. So I think I have a salicylate intolerance. He says, so do I. You know, that man turns out not to be the best immunologist in the world. The best immunologists are here in Australia at the Royal Prince Alfred. But I will always speak highly of that man, not just because of his medicine, but because of his manner. And Jesus could have been a man who just gave great and fantastic medicine, but he wasn't. He was a man who delivered it with amazing manner. In fact, he said, if you turn in your Bibles to Luke chapter 4, verses 16 to 21, he explains his mission so beautifully. Luke chapter 4, and starting at verse 16. And he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and as was his custom, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and he stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim the good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour." And he rolled up the scroll and gave it back to the attendant and sat down. And the eyes of all the synagogue were fixed on him. And he began to say to them, "Today, this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." Jesus shared his mission statement so many times, but he said it so beautifully here when he explained that he was here to do these things, to proclaim good news, to proclaim liberty. He was here to bring recovery, to set at liberty, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour. He was going to do these things for who? For the poor, for the captives, for the blind, for the oppressed, for those who we would call today to be vulnerable people. So what does it mean to be vulnerable? Well, the dictionary definition is exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed either physically or emotionally. There are a number of factors that make a person exposed to different risks, to treatments, to mistreatment. Poverty is one of those factors that leave a person exposed. But you don't have to just be poor. Isolation can leave a person exposed. Age can leave a person exposed. A small child doesn't have the ability to have voice in the same way that an adult has. And actually, our vulnerability increases as we get older. People tend to listen to people in that middle age bracket. If you're little and young or old and frail, we don't tend to listen to people's needs as much. And that can make people exposed. And it's interesting that Jesus spent a significant amount of time with these groups of people, those who were vulnerable, those who were exposed. He came to bring them freedom and to bring safety. And it was said it was his mission to provide for their needs. And everyone in this world has a right to feel safe. Everyone has a right to feel protected. It's hard in Australia sometimes because it's easy for us to think, oh, well, there's Centrelink. No one in Australia should go hungry or feel exposed because there's Centrelink. I get that, and I understand. We live in a reasonably lucky country. But I'm wondering if we are aware of some of the peculiarities of Centrelink. I met a young woman here in Bega. If she chose to stay at the pub for a fortnight, she had $40 a fortnight left out of her Centrelink payment to provide for food. There's no money for a car. There's no money for entertainment. And under Tony Abbott's new Medicare plan, if she chose to go to the doctors one week, there'd be no money to eat. $20 a week is not a lot to eat on. Yeah, we have Centrelink, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't still leave people exposed and vulnerable. And as somebody who works with foster carers and has spent no less than 6 hours in the foyer of Centrelink over the past month, having to boss my way into getting Centrelink sorted, it's not so easy. If you're vulnerable because you can't read these days, most of Centrelink happens on the internet. And if you can't use the internet, and let me assure you, you walk in and they say, why don't you use that computer over there, then it can become very difficult to make sure you're getting everything of the basics that you're entitled to. The only way I get my foster carers to get the basics they're entitled to is to demand to see the manager. And I wander in with this voice, hello, my name's Kylie Ward and I'm from Anglicare, and I'd like to see the manager, please. Yes, I'll wait. Now, I've got a bit of gumption, as you've noticed. Not everybody has. And in the Centrelink system, without gumption, it makes you vulnerable. So does everybody have a right to food, to shelter, a place to live? Another way of thinking about it is, yes, everybody has these rights. And it's just not right that everybody isn't in a safe place. that God himself is rightness. And that when people are not in that God space, we're in that space of wrong. And when we bring God, when we make wrong things right, then we are being in the God space. And we are creating just a little bit more of the God space in a world that is so full of wrong. Well, you know the word that people often use to describe this action of making wrong things right. It's the word justice. And sometimes when people think of the word justice, they think of the legal system. They think of criminals and lawyers and judges and funny wigs. And yes, the legal system is a justice system. And so Christians have coined the term social justice. In the book Do Justice by Joanna Darby and Nathan Brown, this is how they define justice. Doing justice is a call to join with God in setting the world right, restoring broken relationships to the original intention of creation, enacting the kingdom of God as inaugurated by Jesus, and in so doing proclaiming and anticipating the coming completion of his kingdom. With particular concern as directed by the Bible itself for the poor, the oppressed, the marginalised and the suffering. Thus, justice is a many-faceted work of faithful, intentional and practical creativity and goodness lived in partnership with God and with community with others. Well, that's beautiful, isn't it? There's some absolutely beautiful phrases that I love in that definition. Doing justice is a call to join God in setting the world right. How beautiful and amazing is that call? That we actually get the opportunity to join God in making the things that are wrong and disgusting and broken and horrible and evil in this world just a little bit more right. Of course, the Bible does give us the direction to look after the poor, the oppressed, the marginalised and the suffering, to help those who are vulnerable and who can't help themselves. And I agree that justice is a many-faceted work of faithful, intentional and practical creativity and goodness lived in partnership with God. But for me, that definition's a little bit wrong. Too long. It's a little bit too long to remember. And so this is what the Kylie Ward Cullinan definition that I like to work with. Justice is making wrong things right. It's simply bringing a little bit of light to the dark places where the brokenness has overwhelmed and darkness is flooding. We can bring a little bit of light into that space, and where there are wrong things, we can bring a little bit of goodness. Joanna Darby, who was the editor on the book Do Justice, tells her story in a chapter in the book about her interaction with making wrong things right. She said she needed a hat, and as somebody who wants to do justice in the world, she couldn't with all good conscience buy a hat that might have been made by a small child in China given just a few cents an hour to make this hat in a sweatshop. So she did some research and she bought a kangaroo skin hat and happily wore it on all of her family camping adventures. Until one day she began reading the book Dot and the Kangaroo to her children. Do you guys know this book? It's a cute little book. And it was written in 1899 about a little girl who gets lost in the bush and is cared for by a group of animals, most kindly by a lovely motherly kangaroo. I'd encourage you to read the whole book because it's gorgeous, but let me just read you this excerpt. The gentle animal patted her kindly with her delicate black hands. "You are as nice now as my baby kangaroo," she said sadly. "But you will have to grow into a real white human. For some reason, there have to be all sorts of creatures on the earth. There are hawks, snakes, dingoes and humans, and none can tell for what good they exist. They must have dropped onto this world by mistake for another, where there could only have been themselves." "After all," said the kind animal, "it wouldn't do for everyone to be a kangaroo, for I doubt there would be enough grass. But you may become an improved human." "How could I do that?" asked Dot eagerly. "Never wear kangaroo leather boots, never use kangaroo skin rugs, and here it hesitated a little as though the subject were a most unpleasant one to mention. "Never do what?" inquired Dot, anxious to know all that she should do, so as to be improved. "Never eat kangaroo tail soup," said the kangaroo solemnly. "I never will," said Dot earnestly. "I will be an improved human being." Joanna Darby was all of a sudden quite perplexed. What was she going to do? She'd been reading this lovely little book to her children about kangaroos and how we should be kind to animals and kind to each other, and there she was wearing a kangaroo skin hat. So, as somebody who wanted to do justice in the world, she began to Google and discovered that sometimes the way kangaroo skin is made is not very ethical and not very kind to the kangaroos. And as a person who wanted to live as ethically and with as much justice as she possibly could, she decided she would no longer wear her kangaroo skin hat. Now, I confess that I was reading this story on a train in Sydney, and as I read this story of a person who earnestly wanted to do justice in the world and who wandered through life with an app that showed you ethical clothes, I looked down at my David Jones, Kiki K and Suzanne Grey bags that were on the floor of the train and had a little hissy fit. I thought, oh my goodness, it's hard enough for me to find an outfit in the colour and size that I like, and you can get my patient husband to testify that that's the truth, that I'll try on about 700 dresses and never buy a single one of them, not because they're not ethical. And I thought, oh, how will I ever shop again if I have to take an app and work out which ones that I'm allowed to buy, because the clothes that I'm wearing might not actually be just. Oh, I was quite perplexed. But I guess the question that Joanna was asking and that we all ask is, how can I participate in justice? How do I live in the world as somebody who makes wrong things right? And I'm not sure that all of us can sew our own clothes, but maybe there are all things that we can each do. I can't go to Africa, but I can put my money in the offering today to support the work of ADRA, who's in places like Syria, the Pacific, Africa, and who knows with a high level of precision what really needs to be done most of the time. Obviously, the can openers was not their best moment, but they'd people who do good jobs. That maybe I can think more carefully about where I purchase my clothes from. And I can think about what it means to live as a follower of Jesus. And maybe if I can't quite get the apps sorted just yet for ethical clothing, then maybe I can listen just like Jesus did. I love this text where it says, seek justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. This world is very broken. And we can seek justice. We can love mercy. But in a world with such brokenness, I think the admiration, the encouragement to walk humbly, to acknowledge that this world is very broken and we can only do a little bit, because making wrong things right is a hard thing to do. I'll keep praying about the ethical clothing and let God see what he has to say to me about what I need to do to bring justice to this world. And in the meantime, I can continue to participate. Maybe I can listen a little bit more like Jesus did. Maybe I can engage the blind person in conversation and not just offer medicine. Maybe I can be a little bit more warm and encouraging. So I challenge each of us today, what can I do? Not tomorrow, not when you're shopping next week, but today. What can I do to participate with God in making wrong things right? even if it is simply by listening, I encourage you today to take hold of God's hand and to participate in helping make this world just a little tiny bit better.